A kid tries to buy a gift for a friend with just a handful of change and gets humiliated. But someone decides to step in, and that changes everything. In trying to help, he discovers he's gotten himself into something much bigger than he ever imagined. If this story caught your interest, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Now on with the story. It was supposed to be just another ordinary evening in New York City, the kind where the neighborhood grocery store in Park Slope gets packed with tired people, shopping carts half full, and the April heat still hangs heavy in the air. Robert Miller was only there because he needed a moment of normalcy, a break from the suffocating routine of meetings and obligations that consumed every second of his life. At 43, he had built a real estate empire. But in that instant, between aisles of cookies and sodas on sale, he was just another customer in a hurry. The line was moving slowly. Robert was distractedly looking at his phone, firing off automatic replies, when a small movement caught his eye. A little girl, no older than 5, walked into the store alone. She was too small for that environment, wearing a faded t-shirt and shorts with a loose waistband, her feet in old flip-flops. Her hair was pulled back with a simple, crooked hair tie, and her face had the kind of grime that comes from playing outside all day with no one to say it's bath time. But what struck Robert the most was her gaze, too serious for her age, as if she had already learned things no child should ever know. The girl clutched a handful of coins in her small hand, counting softly as she walked the aisles. Robert felt a strange pang in his chest, something between curiosity and a concern he couldn't explain. She stopped in front of a rack near the checkout, where they hung those cheap, colorful plastic toys that cost a few dollars. Carefully, as if choosing the most important thing in the world, she picked up a simple little doll, the kind with yarn hair and a stitched-on dress, and hugged it to her chest. Robert watched all of this, not realizing he had stopped paying attention to his phone. The girl walked to the checkout line with a courage that seemed too big for her tiny frame. The line was long, but she stood there, waiting patiently, holding the toy like a treasure. When it was finally her turn, she placed the doll on the counter and opened her hand, showing the coins to the cashier. Sharon Williams was the cashier's name, a woman in her 50s with a face etched with a permanent expression of exhaustion and bitterness. She glanced at the coins with disdain, then at the girl, and let out an impatient sigh. The girl started counting the coins one by one, her tongue between her teeth in concentration. Robert saw the woman roll her eyes and push the coins back toward the child. "That's not real money," the cashier said, loud enough for several people in line to hear. "Change is a hassle, kid, and kids can't shop. Alone? Where's your mother? Get out of here before I call someone." The little girl froze. Her small face started to turn red, her eyes shining with tears she was trying to hold back. She looked at the coins in her hand, then at the doll on the counter, and her voice came out as a tiny, almost inaudible whisper. "It's a present," she said, "for a friend who never gets anything." The cashier let out a short, dry laugh. "A present? With that? Go play in the street, kid. This isn't the place for you. Next." It was in that moment that something inside Robert broke. He had never been the type to get involved in other people's situations, always preferring to keep his distance from their problems, focused only on his business and maintaining the appearance of a perfectly controlled life. But seeing that child publicly humiliated, her dignity trampled over a few coins, touched something deep inside him he didn't know still existed. "Excuse me," he said, stepping forward. The cashier looked at him with irritation, but her expression changed when she noticed the understated elegance of the suit Robert was wearing, the expensive watch on his wrist. "Why is a child being treated like this?" The woman tried to compose herself, forcing a fake professional smile. "Sir, we have rules here. Coins complicate the change, and children can't make purchases alone. It's store policy." Robert knelt to the little girl's level. She looked at him with a mixture of fear and hope. He saw up close just how fragile she was, how much pain and loneliness were in those small eyes. "What's your name?" he asked gently. The girl hesitated, looking around as if checking if it was safe to answer. "Joanna," she finally whispered. "Joanna. Is this toy important to you?" She nodded, clutching the coins tighter. It's for Bea. She's sad. She doesn't have any toys. I wanted to make her smile. Robert felt a lump form in his throat. He stood up and looked directly at the cashier. I'll pay for the girl's toy and not just this one. He pointed to the rack. I want all the toys on that rack. All of them. You can ring them up. The entire line fell silent. Some people started whispering among themselves. Others pulled out their phones to record. The cashier was at a loss, now trying to appear helpful, offering bags. Her tone of voice completely changed. Robert wasn't interested in her change of heart. I want to speak to the manager, he said calmly, but with a firmness that left no room for argument. The manager appeared quickly, a middle-aged man with a posture that tried to seem authoritative but only betrayed nervousness. Mr. Miller, he said, recognizing Robert. Is there a problem? We can resolve anything. Robert explained the situation in detail, talking about how a child was humiliated for trying to make a legitimate purchase. The manager immediately started apologizing, promising he would take action, that this didn't represent the company's values. Robert cut him off. The problem isn't just your store's policies, he said. The problem is that there's a 5-year-old child shopping alone, trying to buy a present for another child who, in her words, never gets anything. Doesn't that concern you? The manager opened his mouth to respond, but couldn't form a coherent sentence. Robert turned to Joanna, who was watching everything with wide eyes. Joanna, where's your mother? Who takes care of you? The girl looked at the floor. I can't talk about those things, she mumbled. Why not? Because then I'll get hit. The silence that followed was heavy. Several people in line exchanged uncomfortable glances. An elderly woman who was right behind Robert came closer and placed a hand on Joanna's shoulder. Oh my God, child, who does that to you? Joanna didn't answer, just hugged the doll Robert had paid for. He paid for all the others too, filling a large bag with assorted toys. Joanna, he said, kneeling to her level again. You mentioned Bea. Is she your friend? The girl nodded. She's little. She's not doing well. She's hungry sometimes and cries at night. I share my bread with her when I can get some. Robert felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. Where is she? I can help you both. I really can. Joanna looked at him with a suspicion that broke his heart. Adults always say they'll help, but then they disappear, especially the rich ones they help to get on TV. Those words, spoken with the rawness of a child who had been disappointed too many times, hit Robert like a slap in the face. He understood in that moment that his entire life had been built on appearances, on doing the bare minimum to maintain a good image without ever truly caring. I don't want to be on TV, he said sincerely. I just want to understand why you had to go through this. Please, let me meet Bea. Let me really help. Joanna bit her lip, thinking. After a long silence, she said, Okay, but I lead and you follow, and if you do anything wrong, I'll scream and run. Robert agreed. They left the store together, carrying the bag of toys. The manager tried to follow them, offering apologies, but Robert dismissed him with a gesture. When they reached the sidewalk, Robert noticed something strange. There was a man leaning against a lamppost, fiddling with his phone, but his eyes were following their every move. When Robert and Joanna started walking, the man followed them from a distance. Robert felt a chill run down his spine. That man didn't seem like a simple bystander. There was something calculated in the way he positioned himself, always maintaining a specific distance, his eyes always fixed on them. Robert discreetly took out his phone and sent a text to Marcus, his driver and personal security, asking him to stay alert and follow them from a distance without being seen. Something was wrong. He could feel it in the air, an invisible tension that made the hairs on his neck stand up. But he didn't want to scare Joanna, who already seemed frightened enough having to trust a stranger. The girl led him through streets Robert had never set foot on, despite living in New York his whole life. They were narrow alleys, poorly lit back streets, places where the city showed its truest, harshest face. The New York of postcards, of mirrored skyscrapers and wide avenues grew, more distant with every corner they turned. This was another reality, one that existed side by side with luxury, but remained invisible to those who didn't want to see. Joanna walked quickly, with the confidence of someone who knew every corner, every shortcut, every danger. Robert realized she had a system, a specific route she probably used to stay safe. She avoided certain streets, quickened her pace at specific points, and nodded to a few people who seemed to know her. It was a survival code she had learned far too early, far too young. She talked as she walked, dropping bits of information in a natural way, oblivious to the devastating weight of what she was saying. The words came out as if they were mundane, a normal part of life. B has someone who takes care of her, but that person disappears a lot, she explained with the childish voice that should have been talking about dolls and cartoons. Sometimes they're gone for days. When that happens, I stay with her. We share food when I can find some. We sleep near a place with a roof when it's cold, otherwise B gets sick. Robert listened with a heavy heart, each word a stab to his conscience. How was it possible that in the 21st century, in a city like New York, children were living like this? And how was it possible that he, a wealthy and influential man who frequented the best restaurants, drove imported cars and lived in a luxury penthouse, had never truly seen this reality? How many times had he passed people on the streets, averted his gaze, pretended not to see? How many times had he judged, thinking they were lost causes, someone else's problem, the government's responsibility? Shame began to tighten its grip on his throat. For 5 years he had hidden in his bubble of pain and work, using his grief for Laura as an excuse to isolate himself from the world. He had built a fortress around his heart, keeping all the suffering in and all of humanity out. And now, this 5-year-old girl, carrying burdens that should belong to adults, was guiding him through the shadows he had always chosen to ignore. They arrived at a place that wasn't really a house. It was a makeshift space between buildings, hidden behind some abandoned shipping containers that seemed to have been forgotten by some transport company. The ground was packed dirt, trash was scattered in the corners, and the smell of dampness mixed with something sour filled the air. There, in a cardboard box lined with a few old, patched-up rags and covered by a piece of torn plastic tarp, was Beatrice, or B, as Joanna called her so affectionately. She couldn't have been more than 4, maybe not even that. She was even smaller and more fragile than Joanna. Her face was as pale as paper, her lips slightly blue, her sunken eyes surrounded by dark circles that shouldn't exist on such a young child. She was shivering under a thin blanket that looked more like a rag, her tiny body curled up to preserve any shred of warmth. When she saw Joanna, she tried to smile, and in that effort, Robert saw all the innocence and all the tragedy in the world. It was a tired, weak smile, but it was genuine. Her little eyes lit up slightly, like candles about to go out that get one last puff of oxygen. "Joanna," she whispered, her voice faint and hoarse. Joanna ran to her. Not ran, she practically flew with worry and love stamped on her every move. She knelt beside the cardboard box and showed her the doll with a joy so pure it shattered Robert's heart into 1,000 pieces. "Look, Bea, I got it. It's yours. A real present. A present just for you." Beatrice took the doll with her trembling little hands, as if holding the most precious thing in the universe. She hugged the toy to her thin chest, and for the first time, her eyes shone with something that looked like real joy. To her, that piece of plastic and cloth was worth more than all the treasures in the world, because it came from someone who cared, someone who thought of her, someone who saw her as a human being worthy of affection. Robert approached slowly, each step weighing a ton, feeling a lump in his throat that threatened to choke him. His eyes burned with tears he tried to hold back, but that insisted on forming. He knelt there on the dirty, damp ground, feeling the cold earth through the expensive fabric of his suit pants, and understood with a brutal, painful clarity that buying toys had been just a nice gesture, but a terribly insufficient one in the face of the magnitude of suffering these children faced. This wasn't just about hunger or cold, it was about stolen dignity, denied childhoods, futures being erased before they even had a chance to begin. "Hi, Bea," he said softly. "My name is Robert. I'm a friend of Joanna's. You two need help, and I want to really help. Food, a safe place, medical care, everything you need." But before Beatrice could answer, a voice cut through the air like a blade. What are you doing here? Robert turned and saw a woman approaching. She was in her early 30s with disheveled hair, worn-out clothes, and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Joanna immediately tensed up, placing herself in front of Beatrice like a shield. "These girls are my responsibility," the woman said, holding out her hand. "You have no business being here." Robert stood up, placing himself between the woman and the children. "And who are you?" "I'm the one who takes care of them, and I'll call people if you don't leave now. This is going to be a problem for you." Joanna tugged on Robert's sleeve and whispered, "She doesn't like it when we talk to anyone." At that moment, Robert's phone vibrated. It was a message from an unknown number. He looked at the screen and felt his blood run cold. "You shouldn't have gotten involved. Go back to your life before you lose something you love." Robert looked around, searching for who could have sent it, but he only saw the woman in front of him and the scared children behind him. How did someone know he was here? And why did that threat feel so personal, touching on his deepest wound, the loss he had spent years trying to bury under work and money? He put his phone away, trying to stay calm. "I'm going to handle this the right way," he said, more to himself than to anyone else. But as he tried to think of his next move, Joanna did something unexpected. She reached into her shorts pocket, pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, and handed it to Robert quickly, before the woman could see. Robert took the paper and discreetly opened it. It was a note with an address and a name, not a full name, just a nickname, the Owl. And on the back of the paper, drawn in pencil, was a symbol Robert recognized immediately, one that made his entire world tremble. It was the emblem of an institution he knew all too well, an institution that years ago had been connected to the greatest tragedy of his life, to the day he lost everything that truly mattered. His hands started to shake. He looked at Joanna, then at Beatrice, and finally at the woman watching them with that fake smile. Everything was connected in a way he didn't yet understand, but that filled him with an old familiar terror. The woman took a step forward, but before she could speak, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was the man who had followed them from the grocery store. Robert braced himself for the worst, but then he noticed something that confused him even more. The man wasn't looking at him. He was staring intently at Joanna with an expression of absolute shock, and it was then that Joanna, that small, suffering girl, looked directly at Robert and said something that made the ground disappear from under his feet. "You don't remember me, but I remember you." Robert was completely paralyzed by those words. "You don't remember me, but I remember you." How could this little girl, whom he was sure he had never seen before in his life, possibly know him? He knelt down to her level again, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his temples. "What do you mean you remember me, Joanna? Have we met before?" The girl glanced at the man who had emerged from the shadows, then at the woman who claimed to be her guardian, and finally back at Robert. Her small eyes carried an enormous weight, a sad wisdom that shouldn't exist in a child. She opened her mouth to speak, but the woman cut her off sharply. "That's enough, Joanna. You're not saying another word. You two are coming with me now." The woman tried to grab Joanna's arm, but Robert stood in her way. "With all due respect," he said, his voice firm but not aggressive, "these children aren't going anywhere until I understand what's happening here, and you're going to tell me exactly who you are and what your relationship is with them." The woman let out a bitter laugh. "You think you can just show up here in your expensive suit and fix everything with money? It doesn't work like that. These girls are my problem, and you're just another rich guy trying to show off, trying to feel good about yourself for a day." "This isn't about showing off," Robert replied, feeling anger rise within him. "It's about two children who are starving, sleeping on the street, and being exploited by people who should be protecting them." "Exploited?" The woman crossed her arms. "I take care of them when no one else will. I give them food, shelter. You don't know anything." It was then that the man who had been following them finally spoke. His name was Henry Davis, and his voice came out hoarse, thick with emotion. "Brenda," he said, addressing the woman, "stop it. You know damn well you're not taking care of anyone. You're using these kids." Brenda spun around to face him, her eyes flashing. "You have no right to talk, Henry. You're the one who abandoned everything, who disappeared, who left us high and dry. And now you show up playing the hero?" Robert looked from one to the other, trying to understand the dynamic between them. Henry ignored Brenda's words and approached Joanna carefully, as if afraid of scaring her. "Joanna, honey," he said softly, "can you tell me what you meant when you said you remember him?" Joanna looked at Robert again, and tears began to well up in her eyes. "I was really little," she began, her voice trembling. "But I remember a big place full of other kids, a place where we slept in real beds and ate every day. And there was a man who would visit sometimes. He'd arrive in a nice car and bring toys." He smiled, but his eyes were sad. His eyes. He would hold a little girl, always the same one, and stay with her for a long time. Robert felt as if the ground had opened up beneath him. The air seemed to vanish from his lungs. He knew exactly what Joanna was talking about. It was St. Jude's Home for Children, the place where he had spent the worst and best moments of his life, the place where his daughter, Laura, had lived her final months before she was gone forever. Laura had been diagnosed with a serious illness at 7 years old. During her treatment, she had spent a lot of time at a support center for children in difficult situations, a place where she could play and be with other kids who were also fighting tough battles. Robert went there every day after work to spend every possible minute with her. He brought toys for all the children, not just Laura, because she asked him to. She said she wanted all the kids to be happy, even if just for a moment. And then, 5 years ago, Laura had passed away. And with her, a part of Robert had died that never came back. He had buried himself in work, built walls around his heart, and avoided any kind of deep emotional involvement. He had become a successful man, but an empty one. And now, standing before him, was a girl who had known Laura, who had shared those days with her. "You were at St. Jude's," Robert said, his voice breaking. "You knew my daughter." Joanna nodded. "The girl with the long hair you used to hold. She was nice. She shared her toys with me. She called me her friend." Tears streamed down Robert's face, and he couldn't stop them. After 5 years of building barriers, of keeping everything under control, he found himself completely vulnerable before this child who carried a memory he thought was dead. "Laura," he whispered. "You knew my Laura." Henry came closer and put a hand on Robert's shoulder. "I worked at the home back then," he said. "I was a social worker there. I remember you. I remember Laura. She was a special girl, full of light, even with everything she was going through." Robert looked at Henry through his tears. "Then you know," he said. "You know what happened to her." "I do," Henry replied softly. "And I'm so sorry, truly. She spoke about you with so much pride. She said her dad was the strongest man in the world." Robert couldn't hold back the sob that rose in his throat. Laura had always tried to be strong for him, always tried to smile even when the pain was too much. And in the end, when she was gone, Robert had felt like the weakest man in the world, unable to save the one person who truly mattered. Brenda watched it all with an expression that mixed discomfort and impatience. "This is all very touching," she said sarcastically, "but it doesn't change anything. These girls are still my responsibility, and you need to get out of here before I call the cops." "Call them," Robert said, wiping his tears and regaining his composure. "Call the police. It'll be interesting to explain to them why 2 children are living in such deplorable conditions under your supposed care." Brenda became visibly nervous. "You don't know who you're messing with," she threatened. Robert took a step toward her. "And you don't know who you're talking to. I have resources, I have lawyers, I have connections. If I have to, I will rain down investigations on this place until I uncover every sordid detail of what's going on." Just then, Beatrice, who had been quiet until that moment, clutching her doll, started to cough. It was a dry, deep cough that racked her small body. Joanna immediately rushed to her, hugging her friend and trying to calm her down. "Bea needs a doctor," Joanna said desperately. "She's been like this for days. I asked Brenda to take her, but she said she didn't have any money." Robert didn't hesitate. He took out his phone and called his driver. "Marcus, bring the car. To my location, it's urgent. We're taking a child to the hospital now." Then he turned to Joanna and Beatrice. "We're going to take care of Bea. She's going to get the best care possible." "You can't just take them," Brenda yelled. but her voice no longer had the same force. She knew she was losing control of the situation. Henry stood beside Robert. "I'm going with you," he said. "I still have contacts from my social work days. I can help sort out the legal situation for these girls." Within minutes, Robert's car arrived. It was a black sedan, discreet but clearly expensive. Marcus, a large, middle-aged man, got out quickly and opened the doors. Robert carefully picked up Beatrice, feeling how light and fragile she was. Joanna got into the back seat, holding her friend's hand, and Henry got in too. Brenda stood on the street, watching them go with a mixture of anger and something that looked like fear. Before they got in the car, Joanna tugged on Robert's sleeve. "The paper," she whispered. "Did you read the paper?" Robert pulled the crumpled note from his pocket. "Yes, I saw it. What does this symbol mean, and who is the owl?" Joanna looked around nervously. "I can't talk here, I'll tell you later, but you have to be careful. There are people who don't want anyone to know." The car sped off toward the hospital. During the ride, Robert held Beatrice, whose coughing became less frequent as she seemed to calm down in his arms. Joanna clutched the doll and stared out the window at the passing city. Henry watched everything in silence, lost in what seemed to be heavy thoughts. Robert couldn't stop thinking about the connection between it all. St. Jude's home had closed down, 2 years after Laura passed away. There had been rumors at the time about irregularities, about misappropriated funds, but he had been so consumed by his own grief that he hadn't paid attention. Now, that symbol on the paper, the same one that had been on the front of the home, had reappeared, brought to him by a girl who knew his daughter. "Henry," Robert said, breaking the silence, "what happened to St. Jude's after it closed?" Henry sighed deeply. "It was a mess," he answered. "They found out the director was embezzling donations. A lot of the kids were on me, transferred to other facilities, but some just vanished from the system. Joanna was one of them. I tried to find her at the time, but it was impossible. It was like she just disappeared." "And Beatrice?" Robert asked. Henry shook his head. "I don't know, but from what Joanna said, Beatrice showed up later, already on the streets. Someone is scooping up these kids who have fallen through the cracks." "For what?" Robert asked, a chill running down his spine. Henry didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and worried. "There are networks," he said, "people who prey on vulnerable children. They use them for begging, for illegal labor, for things I don't even want to imagine. And these networks are protected. They have important people involved." Robert held Beatrice a little tighter. "That's not going to happen to these girls," he said with determination. "I'll protect them, no matter who I have to fight." They arrived at Mount Sinai Hospital, one of the best in New York. Robert had connections there, doctors he knew from charity events. When they entered the emergency room with Beatrice, they were seen immediately. A medical team took the girl for tests while Robert, Joanna, and Henry waited in the waiting room. Joanna sat next to Robert, still holding the doll. He looked at her, at this child who carried so much weight on her small shoulders. "Joanna," he said softly, "can you tell me now, about the paper, about this owl?" Joanna bit her lip, looking around to make sure no one was listening. "The owl is a man," she began. "He shows up sometimes where the street kids hang out. He offers food, a place to sleep. But the kids who go with him never come back. Or if they do, they're different, scared. They don't talk anymore." Robert felt rage boiling inside him. "And Brenda? Does she work with this man?" Joanna shrugged. "I don't know, but she knows him. One time I heard her on the phone, talking about the owl, saying she had new girls. I pretended I was asleep, but I heard." Henry joined the conversation. "That symbol on the paper," he said. "It was from St. Jude's. Why did you have this paper, Joanna?" "I found it," she replied. "It was in a place where Brenda keeps things. There were lots of papers with names and numbers. I took one when she wasn't looking." Robert took the paper out again and looked at it closely. The address was in Jamaica, Queens, a neighborhood he knew by name but had never visited. He was about to ask more when his phone rang. It was a blocked number. He answered cautiously. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was distorted, clearly using some kind of modulator. "Mr. Miller," the voice said, You're meddling in things you shouldn't. Your daughter is already gone. Don't make the mistake of losing someone else because of your stubbornness." Robert felt his blood run cold. "Who is this? How do you know about my daughter?" The voice gave a cold laugh. "I know many things, Mr. Miller. I know your business, your routine, the people you love. And believe me, you have more to lose than you can imagine. Leave the girls where they were, go back to your life, forget what you saw today." "Never," Robert said firmly, even as fear tightened its grip on his chest. "I will not abandon these children. Bring on your threats, try to scare me, but I will not back down." The voice was silent for a moment. "Then you've made your choice," it said finally. "Remember this choice when everything comes crashing down around you, and I assure you, it will." The line went dead. Robert stood there, phone still in hand, processing the threat. Henry was watching him with concern. "What was that?" he asked. "Threats," Robert replied. "Someone wants me to abandon the girls, but that's not going to happen." Just then, a doctor came out of the examination room. She was young, in her 30s, with a serious expression. "Mr. Miller?" she called, mistaking him for a doctor, because of the way he was acting. "I'm not a doctor," Robert corrected. "I'm a friend of the family. How is she?" The doctor sighed. "She's malnourished, dehydrated, and has a respiratory infection that needs to be treated with strong antibiotics. We're going to admit her for a few days for observation, but with the right treatment she'll make a full recovery. She was lucky you brought her in when you did." Robert felt an immense wave of relief wash over him. "Thank you, doctor. Do whatever is necessary. Money is no object." The doctor nodded and went back to care for Beatrice. Joanna tugged on Robert's sleeve. "Can I stay with her?" she asked, her eyes full of hope. "You can," Robert answered, stroking the girl's hair. "Yes, you can stay. In fact, both of you will be under my protection from now on. I'm going to make sure you have everything you need." Joanna hugged him suddenly, squeezing tight, and Robert felt something inside him break and rebuild itself all at once. He was doing the right thing, of that he was sure. But he also knew he had just entered a war he barely understood, against enemies. Who knew his weaknesses? And that symbol on the paper, that emblem from St. Jude's home, was the key to understanding everything. It was the connection between the past he had tried to bury and the present that was unfolding before him in increasingly dangerous ways. Henry came over. "I'm going to make some calls," he said. "I still have friends in social services. We're going to start a serious investigation into these exploitation rings, and we're going to protect these girls, no matter what." Robert nodded, grateful he wasn't alone in this, but as Henry walked away to make his calls, and Joanna was taken to stay with Beatrice in her room, Robert stood alone in the waiting room, staring at that symbol on the crumpled paper, and feeling that the storm to come would be far greater than anything he had ever faced. If you were in Robert's shoes, would you have gotten involved with the girls knowing the risks, or would you have returned to your comfortable life? Tell us in the comments. The following days were a roller coaster of emotions and discoveries that completely transformed Robert's life. Beatrice was hospitalized for 4 days, during which both she and Joanna received all the necessary medical care. Robert hired a private team to ensure the girls had the best of everything, from proper nutrition to psychological support. He visited the hospital every day, sometimes 2 or 3 times, bringing toys, books, and new clothes. Slowly, the girls began to open up, sharing more about their lives on the streets. Henry worked tirelessly to sort out the children's legal status. He discovered that Joanna had indeed left St. Jude's home when it closed, but her records were a mess, full of inconsistencies. Beatrice was even more of a mystery, with practically no documentation at all. It was as if she had never officially existed. This complicated things legally, but it also raised red flags about how these children had fallen so deeply through the cracks of the system. Robert transformed one of the spare bedrooms in his Tribeca penthouse into a welcoming space for the girls. He bought new beds, filled the closet with clothes, and decorated the walls with colorful drawings. For the first time in 5 years, since Laura had passed, that apartment had life again, the sound of children's laughter echoing through the halls. It was both painful and comforting. Every time he saw Joanna and Beatrice playing, Robert saw Laura there too, her smile, her joy, her kindness. And he realized that perhaps Laura had left a greater legacy than he had imagined, that their meeting in the grocery store had been no coincidence. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. The threats continued. Anonymous texts, unsigned letters left with the doorman, middle-of-the-night phone calls with distorted voices repeating the same message. Give the girls back. Forget what you discovered. Go back to your life. Robert increased security in his building, hired private bodyguards to accompany him, and installed cameras everywhere. But he knew he was fighting something bigger, a network with tentacles reaching everywhere. One afternoon, while the girls were resting after lunch, Robert decided to go to the address on the paper Joanna had given him. He took Henry and 2 security guards with him. The place was in Jamaica, Queens, in an old, dilapidated building surrounded by narrow streets and local shops. They parked a block away and walked. Robert wore simple clothes, trying not to draw attention, but it was hard to completely disguise his posture, the way he walked, the signs of a comfortable life. The 5-story building smelled of mold and neglect. There was no doorman, the front door was broken. They climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, to apartment 13, the number on the paper. Robert knocked. Nothing. He knocked again, harder. They heard movement inside, footsteps approaching. The door opened just a crack, held by a chain lock. An eye peered out at them. "What do you want?" a woman's voice asked, hoarse and suspicious. "We're looking for information," Robert said, "about children who lived at a home called St. Jude's, and about someone known as the Owl." The door slammed shut. They heard the sound of things being moved around hastily. Henry looked at Robert. "She's going to run." They tried to force the door, but it was sturdy. One of the guards finally managed to break it down, and they rushed into the apartment. The place was small, dirty, with old furniture scattered about. There were photos on the walls, photos of children, dozens of them. Robert's stomach turned when he recognized some of the faces, children he had seen at the home years ago, including Joanna. The woman had escaped through the window, climbing down. A fire escape. They tried to follow, but she was fast, knew every alley, every shortcut. She disappeared into the street crowd. Robert went back to the apartment and began to examine everything carefully. There were folders with documents, lists of names, addresses, phone numbers. They were records of children, all from St. Jude's or similar places. There were notes on physical characteristics, ages, behaviors. It was disturbing, as if they were goods being catalogued. Henry found an old computer in a corner. He turned it on, and to his surprise, it wasn't password protected. He started searching the files and found correspondence, emails exchanged with several people. One name appeared frequently, August Fisher, or as he was called in the emails, the Owl. The messages spoke of transfers, deliveries, payments. They used code, but the gist was clear. Children were being moved around like pieces on a chessboard. One of the guards found something even more disturbing. In a built-in closet, hidden behind old clothes, was a small safe. They managed to open it with some effort and found cash, a lot of it, and what appeared to be fake IDs. But what caught their attention most was a sealed envelope with the St. Jude's home emblem. Robert opened it with trembling hands. Inside were old photos, photos of the home, the children, the staff, and in one of them, Robert saw himself, younger, holding Laura in his arms. Beside her, small and shy, was Joanna, and in the background, slightly out of focus, was the woman who had fled through the window. She had worked at the home. Robert felt his legs go weak. He sat down on a broken chair, holding the photo, trying to process it all. This woman knew Laura, she knew Joanna. She had been involved. From the beginning. "Henry," he called out, his voice hoarse, "do you know this woman?" Henry took the photo and studied it. His face went pale. "Claire," he said. "Claire Olson. She was an administrative assistant at the home, handled paperwork, records, that sort of thing. But when the home closed and the investigation started, she vanished. No one could find her to testify. And now we know why," Robert said, feeling anger mixed with a deep sadness. "She was part of the scheme all along. She helped steal these children, erase their tracks, and hand them over to this network." They collected everything they could as evidence and left the apartment. Robert knew he had to take this to the authorities, but he also knew that if this network was so well structured, so protected, it probably had people on the inside, including the police. He had to be strategic, careful. One wrong move, and the girls could be in even greater danger. Back at his apartment, Robert found the girls drawing in the living room. Joanna had a new box of colored pencils and paper and was teaching Beatrice how to draw flowers. The scene was so pure, so full of hope, that Robert almost didn't have the heart to bring the shadows of the outside world in. But Joanna noticed something in his face. "You went to that place," she said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. "You saw the pictures." Robert sat on the floor beside them. "I did," he confirmed. "Joanna, the woman from that apartment, Claire. Do you know her?" Joanna nodded slowly, putting her pencil down. "She worked at the place with the beds. She was nice to me at first. After your daughter went away, she changed. She got different, weird. One day she took me to another place and said I was going to live with other kids, but it wasn't a good place. There was a mean lady who yelled. I ran away." "And how did you end up with Brenda?" Robert asked. "Brenda found me on the street, said she would help me, give me food and a place to sleep. It was good at first, but then she started using me and other kids to beg for money, to carry things from one place to another. She kept all the money. If we didn't bring back enough, she would yell, sometimes hit us. I tried to run away a bunch of times, but she always found me." Robert felt rage explode inside him. These people had stolen Joanna's childhood, had turned an innocent little girl into a child who had to survive on the streets. And how many other children were going through the same thing? How many other Joannas and Beatrices were out there, invisible, forgotten? That night, after the girls were asleep, Robert locked himself in his office with Henry. They spread all the documents on the table, trying to piece together the puzzle. Henry had experience with child exploitation cases. He knew the patterns, the tactics. He explained that these networks usually operated in layers. At the bottom were the collectors, people like Brenda, who picked up vulnerable children off the streets. In the middle were the organizers, likely Claire, who handled logistics, fake paperwork and records. And at the top was the owl, the man who controlled everything, who had the connections, the power, the protection. "We have to get to him," Robert said. "We need to dismantle this from the top down." "It's dangerous," Henry warned. "People like that have protection. Important. People in their pockets. If they feel threatened, they could react in ways we can't even imagine." "I know the risks," Robert replied, "but I can't just pretend I didn't see anything, not after everything. Laura wouldn't have wanted that. She always wanted to help, always cared about the other kids. Now I understand that this was the legacy she wanted to leave, and I'm going to honor it." Henry sighed, but there was admiration in his eyes. "Then let's do this right. I'll talk to a prosecutor I know, someone I trust. He can start an official investigation without tipping off the wrong people." In the following weeks, Robert and Henry worked discreetly, gathering evidence, making connections. The prosecutor, a man named Paul Evans, was shocked by what they presented. He promised to open a confidential investigation, bringing in only his most trusted people. But he also warned that it would be a slow process, that they couldn't act rashly or everything would fall apart. Meanwhile, Robert tried to give the girls the childhood they deserved. He enrolled them in a private school, hired tutors and took them on outings on the weekends. Joanna, who was initially suspicious and withdrawn, slowly began to open up, to smile more, to be a real kid. Beatrice, after fully recovering from her infection, turned out to be a cheerful and curious girl, full of questions about everything. They started calling Robert Uncle Rob, and every time he heard it, his heart ached in a good way. But the shadows were still lurking. Robert began to notice he was being followed. Strange cars appeared on his street. People watched him when he went out with the girls, and the messages continued, each one more threatening than the last. One night Robert woke up, to the fire alarm blaring. He ran to get the girls and discovered that someone had tried to set fire to his apartment door. The building's security put out the fire quickly, but the message was clear. They knew where he lived, they knew where the girls were. Robert made a difficult decision. He temporarily moved the girls to a safe house in upstate New York under constant protection. He himself started moving around less, varying his routes, being careful with every step. The investigation was progressing. Paul Evans had managed to trace suspicious financial transactions linked to the owl, but they still hadn't located the man himself. Then something unexpected happened. Brenda resurfaced. She contacted Robert through an intermediary, saying she wanted to make a deal, that she had important information. Robert hesitated, suspecting a trap. But Paul Evans thought it was worth the risk. They arranged a meeting in a public place, a busy mall, with plainclothes security and police nearby. Brenda looked different, thinner, with deep dark circles under her eyes, her hair a mess. She seemed terrified, constantly looking around. When she sat down across from Robert, her hands were shaking. "I want out," she said bluntly. "But I need protection, guarantees." "Why now?" Robert asked, his voice cold. "After all this time exploiting these children, why do you want out?" Brenda looked down. "Because they're going to kill me anyway," she replied. "I know too much. I've seen what happens to other people who tried to leave or who talk too much. They just disappear. I don't want to be next." "What do you know?" Paul Evans asked, leaning forward. "I know where the owl operates," Brenda said. "I know how the network functions, who's involved, where other children are. I know about the money, about the politicians and businessmen who fund this whole thing. I even know about St. Jude's, about how it was used as a source for vulnerable kids." "And what do you want in exchange for this information?" Robert asked. "Protection," Brenda repeated. "Entry into the witness protection program. And immunity. I know I did wrong things, but I'm not the monster here. I was a victim too at first. I was used. And now I want to do the right thing." Robert looked at Paul Evans, who gave a slight nod. "If your information is true and leads to arrests, we can negotiate," the prosecutor said. "But you'll have to cooperate fully, tell us everything, detail by detail." Brenda agreed. And there, in that corner of the mall, with the noise of people passing, music playing and children laughing, she began to spill years of secrets. She talked about how St. Jude's was just one of many places used by the network. She talked about how children were selected, the most vulnerable, those without families, the ones no one would look for. She talked about how they were moved for different purposes, forced labor, organized begging, and even worse things she didn't want to detail. "And the owl?" Robert asked. "Who is he really?" Brenda took a deep breath. "August Fisher, a respected businessman, owner of several front companies. He uses the network not just for exploitation, but for money laundering. The children are just one part of a much larger scheme. He's protected by powerful people, politicians, judges, cops. That's why no one's ever been able to touch him." "How do we get to him?" Paul Evans asked. "There's an event," Brenda said. "A week from now, a charity art auction. He always goes to keep up his good guy image. It's a chance to confront him publicly, with witnesses, with the press. He won't be able to disappear or threaten anyone there." Robert felt something shift inside him. They finally had a plan, a real chance to end this. But he also knew he was about to face the most dangerous man in this story, a man who had destroyed countless lives and wouldn't hesitate to destroy his. When he returned home that night, Robert stayed up late, looking out the window at the lights of New York City. He thought of Laura, of how proud she would be of him for fighting for these children. He thought of Joanna and Beatrice, of giving them the future they deserved. And he thought of all the other children still trapped in that network, waiting for someone to see them, to care. He picked up the phone and called Henry. "We're close to the end," he said. "1 week and we confront the owl. Are you with me?" "To the end," Henry replied without hesitation. And so, as the city slept, plans were made, strategies were formed, and a silent army prepared for a battle that would decide the fate of many innocent lives. The night of the charity auction arrived, wrapped in a tension Robert could feel in his skin. The event was held at the Astor Ballroom, a sophisticated space in Soho frequented by New York's elite. Robert wore his best suit, not out of vanity, but because he needed to blend into that environment without raising suspicion. Henry would go as his guest, and Paul Evans would be present with a discreet team of investigators and plainclothes officers. Brenda was hidden in a van outside, ready to confirm the owl's presence. When Robert entered the ballroom, he was met with an atmosphere of excessive luxury. Crystal chandeliers illuminated walls adorned with valuable art, waiters circulated with trays of champagne and fine canapés, and elegantly dressed people chatted in small groups, feigning interest in charity while showing off expensive jewelry and watches. Robert felt a wave of nausea, thinking that at that very moment, just a few miles away, children like Joanna and Beatrice were fighting to survive, invisible to all these people. He moved through the room with Henry, greeting acquaintances, keeping up appearances. His heart was racing, but he forced a calm expression. Suddenly, his phone vibrated. It was a text from Brenda. He just arrived, grey suit, grey hair, near the bar. Robert looked in the indicated direction and saw him. August Fisher, the owl. He was a man in his 60s, with an elegant demeanor and an easy smile, greeting everyone with familiarity. He looked like the last person anyone would suspect of being behind a child exploitation ring, and that was exactly why he had managed to operate for so long without being caught. Robert took a deep breath and started to approach. Henry followed closely. Paul Evans from across the room gave a discreet signal that he was ready. The plan was simple. Robert would start a conversation, try to get August to reveal something while everything was being recorded. With luck, they would get enough evidence for an arrest. But Robert knew that men like August were careful. They rarely made mistakes. "Mr. Fisher," Robert said as he approached, extending his hand. "Robert Miller. I believe we've seen each other at a few events." August shook his hand firmly, his cordial smile never wavering. "Of course, Mr. Miller, the famous real estate mogul. A pleasure. Interested in any art tonight?" "Actually, I'm more interested in talking about social work," Robert said, choosing his words carefully. "I've recently become involved with issues related to vulnerable children, and I was told you also support some causes in that area." Something shifted in August's eyes, just for a fraction of a second, but Robert caught it. It was a calculation, an assessment. "Yes, I support several institutions," August replied smoothly. "It's important to give back to the community, but I confess I don't usually get directly involved. I prefer to make donations and let the professionals handle the field work." "Interesting," Robert continued, "because I recently discovered a very well-organized network that preys on these children, and the name The Owl has come up quite a bit in my inquiries." August's smile finally faltered. He took a sip of his champagne, buying time. "I'm sorry, I don't understand where you're going with this," he said, his voice still friendly but with an edge of coldness. Henry stepped closer. "I used to work at St. Jude's Home," he said. "I remember suspicious documents and transactions, and now, years later, we've discovered a network was using that home as a source of children for exploitation." August looked from one to the other, and for the first time Robert saw the real man behind the mask. His eyes became hard, calculating. "You're making very serious accusations," he said quietly. "I hope you have proof of what you're insinuating." "We do," Robert replied. "We have documents, witnesses, financial records, and we have 2 little girls who survived your scheme and are willing to tell everyone everything." August's face went white. For a moment, Robert thought he would deny it all, maintain the facade. But then something unexpected happened. August let out a low, bitter laugh. "You have no idea what you've gotten yourselves into," he said. "You think you can just show up here and confront me. You think I don't have protection." At that moment, Paul Evans approached with his investigators. "Mr. Fisher," he said, showing his ID. "I'm Prosecutor Paul Evans. We have a warrant to seize documents and we'd like you to accompany us for questioning." The entire ballroom fell silent. Conversations stopped and all eyes turned to the scene. August looked around, realizing he was cornered. "You will regret this," he said to Robert, his voice laced with venom. "You'll find out that messing with me comes at a very high price." But before he could say more, something no one expected happened. A woman pushed through the crowd toward them. It was Claire, the assistant from the home who had run away. But she wasn't alone. She was holding the hand of a thin, frightened girl of about 8. "Enough!" Claire cried, tears streaming down her face. "I can't do this anymore. I can't keep lying. Keep hiding." "Claire, shut your mouth," August hissed, but she ignored him. "This girl," she said, pointing to the child beside her, "was taken from the home 3 years ago, just like dozens of others. I helped do it. I forged documents, erased records, handed children over to this man. And he used them, exploited them, destroyed their lives. And I did it because he threatened me, because he has power, because I was scared. But not anymore. I won't let another child go through this." The ballroom was now in complete silence. People were filming with their phones, and journalists covering the event were closing in. August tried to leave, but the investigators surrounded him. Paul Evans gave a signal and more police officers entered the room. "August Fisher, you are under arrest," the prosecutor declared. As August was led away in handcuffs, shouting about his lawyers and his connections, Robert felt his legs go weak. It was over, or at least the first part was over. He knew there was still a lot of work ahead. Trials, convictions, and rescuing all the other children involved in the network. But right then, in that moment, they had won a major battle. Claire approached Robert, still holding the little girl's hand. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice broken, "for everything, for Joanna, for Beatrice, for all of them. I was weak. I was scared, but that's no excuse. I need to pay for what I've done." Robert looked at her and saw genuine remorse. "You will pay," he said, "but you'll also have a chance to help fix this. You're going to help us find all the other children. You're going to testify and make sure August and everyone else involved is convicted." Claire nodded, hugging the girl beside her. "I'll do whatever I can." The following days were a whirlwind. August Fisher's arrest became national news. The investigation expanded, uncovering a network that went far beyond what anyone had imagined. Politicians were implicated, respected businessmen had their names tarnished, and the entire society was forced to look at a problem it had always preferred to ignore. Children were rescued from horrific situations, taken to proper shelters, and given care and attention. Brenda entered the Witness Protection Program, and her testimony was crucial in dismantling several parts of the network. Throughout this process, Robert stayed by Joanna and Beatrice's side. He began the formal adoption process for both girls, something he never thought he would do again after losing Laura. But the more time he spent with them, the more he realized it was exactly what Laura would have wanted. She had always talked about helping other children, about using the love they had for each other to make the world a better place. And now, Robert understood that Laura had planted a seed in him that was only now beginning to bloom. A few weeks after all the chaos, on a quiet Sunday morning, Robert was at the park with the girls. They were playing on the playground, laughing, running, just being kids. Joanna had gained weight, her face was rosy and healthy, and her eyes shone with a joy Robert had never seen before. Beatrice, always the talkative one, was telling wild stories about princesses and dragons while pushing a swing. Robert was sitting on a bench, watching, when Henry joined him. "How are you doing?" Henry asked. "Tired," Robert admitted, "but good. Really good for the first time in a long time." "The girls are going to be okay," Henry said. "You're giving them the life they deserve." "No," Robert corrected. "They're giving me the life I deserve. They gave me back a purpose, a reason to wake up in the morning. I was dead inside for 5 years, Henry. Ever since Laura left, I built walls so high around myself I thought I'd never feel anything again. But that day in the grocery store, when I saw Joanna being humiliated, something broke. And now looking at them, I feel like Laura is here with me, smiling, telling me I finally get it." Joanna saw Robert looking and ran over to him. "Uncle Rob," she called. That's what she always called him now. "Come push us on the swings." Robert stood up with a smile. "You got it, princess." He spent the rest of the morning playing with them, pushing swings, throwing a ball, laughing at silly things. And in every one of their laughs, he heard Laura's echo, felt her presence, her approval. The little girl he had lost was still alive in the kindness he now spread, in the love he gave to these 2 children who needed it so much. That night, after putting Joanna and Beatrice to bed, Robert went to the room that had been Laura's, which he had kept untouched for 5 years. He went inside, something he rarely did, and sat on the bed. He picked up the photo of his daughter from the nightstand. She was smiling at the camera, with those eyes full of life that he loved so much. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for teaching me how to truly love. Thank you for showing me that pain can be transformed into something beautiful. I'll take care of them, Laura. I'll give them all the love you taught me to have." He put the photo back and left the room, but this time he didn't close the door. He left it ajar, symbolically allowing that room to become part of the house's life again, letting Laura's memory be an inspiration, not a prison. In the weeks that followed, Robert used his influence and resources to create a foundation in Laura's name. The Laura Miller Foundation would be dedicated to identifying children in vulnerable situations, offering support, education, and medical and psychological care. Henry became the chief operating officer, bringing his experience and passion to the cause. They hired social workers, psychologists, and educators. They rented a large building and turned it into a welcoming space where children could come during the day for activities, meals, and tutoring. Joanna and Beatrice became informal ambassadors for the foundation. They visited regularly, played with other children, and shared their stories of overcoming adversity. And every child who came there and saw two happy, healthy, vibrant girls gained hope that they too could have a different future. One day, months after that afternoon in the grocery store, Robert got a call from Paul Evans. August Fisher had been sentenced to over 30 years in prison. Several others involved in the network also received heavy sentences. Claire, in exchange for her cooperation, received a reduced sentence and would serve it in a halfway house, dedicating her community service hours to the foundation. Brenda was safe in witness protection, rebuilding her life far from New York. Robert hung up the phone and looked out the window of the foundation's office. Down in the courtyard, Joanna and Beatrice were playing with other children, all of them laughing, all of them safe, all of them with a chance. He thought about how that ordinary day at the grocery store had changed everything, how a simple act of not looking away, of not ignoring an injustice, had set off a chain of events that transformed not only the lives of those girls, but his own and so many others. He picked up his phone and looked again at that old photo he had found in Claire's apartment, the photo of him with Laura and little Joanna in the background, 3 lives connected by a moment in time, by a place that brought together souls in need. And now, years later, that connection had saved not only Joanna and Beatrice, but it had saved Robert himself from the darkness he had been living in. That night, when he got home with the girls, they had dinner together, talked about their day, and laughed at silly jokes. At bedtime, Robert tucked them in, a ritual that had become sacred. Joanna hugged him tight. "Uncle Rob," she said, "I love you." It was the first time she had said it. Robert felt his eyes burn with tears. "I love you too, Princess. So much." Beatrice, ever the talker, added, "We're a real family now, right?" Robert smiled, stroking both their heads. "We are, Bea. A real family." He turned off the light and stood for a moment in the doorway, watching the 2 girls, nearly asleep, safe, loved and protected. And in that instant, Robert felt a peace he hadn't experienced in years. He felt he had finally found his way back to life, and that path had been lit by 2 little girls and a daughter who, though no longer physically present, continued to guide his steps from wherever she was. Outside, the city of New York continued its chaotic dance of light and motion. But inside that apartment, inside those hearts that had been broken and mended, there was peace, there was love, there was hope, and there was the certainty that no matter how dark the night may be, there is always the possibility of a new dawn. Robert walked to the living room and picked up the crumpled note Joanna had given him that first day, the one with the St. Jude's emblem. He folded it carefully and put it in a special drawer where he kept Laura's most important things, because that piece of paper had been the bridge between his past of pain and his future of purpose. It had been the map that guided him back to his own humanity. And as he got ready for bed, Robert looked at a new photo on the wall, a picture of the 3 of them together. Him, Joanna and Beatrice, taken on a sunny Sunday in the park. All of them smiling, all of them happy, an imperfect family, built on loss and new beginnings, but a true family, united by love and the determination to turn pain into hope. Out there, somewhere in the city, other children still needed help. Other Joannas and Beatrices were waiting for someone to see them, and Robert knew his work was just beginning. But now, he wasn't alone anymore. He had two girls who filled him with love. He had friends dedicated to the cause, and he had a foundation making a difference. And above all, he had the certainty that Laura would be proud, that the little girl with shining eyes who loved other children so much was still saving lives through the transformation she had brought about in her father's heart. And so, in a New York that never sleeps, a city of contrasts and challenges, 3 hearts beat in sync, 3 souls found rest, 3 lives intertwined by a destiny that began with a few coins in a small hand and a heart too big to ignore injustice. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Robert, Joanna and Beatrice has touched your heart. If you were moved, please hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and tell us in the comments what part of the story resonated with you the most. Every day, we bring you intense stories like this one, revealing the deepest side of the human soul. We'll see you in the next episode.